Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. And this tonight is going to be a talk by my long-term colleague, research colleague, Ian Watts, who is a research fellow here at UCL Anthropology Department. Ian has been the most famous for his work on the archaeology, especially the archaeology of red ochre in the Middle Stone Age, the African Middle Stone Age. And really ahead of the game in the 90s, Ian was already making arguments about our African modern human ancestors being fully symbolic with ritual and symbolic traditions, language, singing, dancing, all singing, dancing modern humans, which was back in the 90s not the position that everybody understood at all, with ideas about the European Upper Paleolithic. So that's kind of the main thing that Ian is noted for. However, he's a major expert on hunter-gatherer ethnography of Africa, including Khoisan Bushman ethnography. Currently, his projects include work on pigments and cosmetics, which are non-mineral pigments, not red ochre, but plant pigments used amongst African hunter-gatherers, and there's some wonderful publications in the offing. Tonight, though, he's going to be telling some stories and interpreting stories from Hadza hunter-gatherers of East Africa. And some of this material is really new and raw, and comes from work that was done by Elena Mouriki, who's here with us on the Zoom. Hi, Elena. So Ian was with Elena, who's his wife, in Hadza country in Tanzania in 2004 to 5, and collecting narratives. The Hadza are very famous as a subject of research in terms of human evolution, because they are the last remaining big game hunter-gatherers living in Africa, but in the Rift Valley, where we became humans pretty much. And so they've been the subject of a great deal of evolutionary research, but there has been a great neglect of the Hadza in terms of religion, beliefs, and cosmology. One person who did the most research on the Hadza, James Woodburn, very sadly, we lost him this summer. He died this summer at age 88, but it was a great loss because James was one of the only Europeans who could speak Hadzane, a very complex click language. Now, the stories that Ian's focusing on are focusing on an entity, the Mantis. In Hadzane, the word is we probably ought to write it up. I'll write it up on the bullet bird. It's a very old word because it's got these pop clicks all through it. And the Mantis is an entity which is both a subject of sort of comedy, fun stories, which Ian's going to tell, but also of kind of rather awesome and uncanny powers that it's not quite clear just what are the extent of these powers. Now, Ian's going to make some comparisons with Khoisan Bushman stories, where Mantis is also a very significant figure, particularly Southern Bushman Xam stories. The famous trickster known as Kaggen had the guise as the Mantis. So there will be some points of comparison. Now, the reason that that's important is because separation times between the Bushman ancestry and Hadza ancestry may be tens of thousands of years, like 30, 40, 50,000 years. So we're really talking about, if there are shared elements between Hadza story structures and Bushman story structures, we're talking about very old elements indeed, from kind of proto-symbolic African cultures of Middle Stone Age. They could be very ancient. The other aspect that Ian will be showing is to do with what I was arguing last week when I was talking about the original picket line, the sex strike, that generates a lunar or menstrual cosmology, which is known as, which we call the syntax, a sort of symbolic structural syntax that applies to mythology, to stories, to rituals, with an oscillation between waxing and waning moon. And I think Ian's going to be drawing on that to try to guide our understanding of what's going on with these stories. But I think that's enough for me to say. And Ian, you can just take over.
Thanks, Camilla. 2 weeks ago, you heard Chris introduce myths of matriarchy, widely encountered among hunter-gatherer and horticulturalist societies, telling of a time when ritual power belonged to women and how men appropriated that power, often justified in terms of ensuring that cultural order on earth remained in sync with that ordained in the heavens. Last week, you heard Camilla propose that a good metaphor for the emergence of norms, solidarity, and shared consciousness was the picket line. Applying this to the Middle Pleistocene, she argued that the conflict concerned the exploitation of women's reproductive labor, that evolving late Homo mothers needed to harness unprecedented levels of male investment to meet the energetic costs of the last period of brain size increase. She proposed 2 stages to the evolution of group ritual. To prevent males from picking and choosing on the basis of fertility status, female coalitions initially scrambled the information available, information provided by menstrual bleeding as a reliable signal of impending fertility by sharing the blood around, using blood substitutes like red ochre. The second stage was a periodic sex drive with pantomime performances of wrong sex, wrong species, wrong sex, wrong time, with wrong time coded as blood flow. This would begin at dark moon to motivate men's collective big game hunting, returning to a home base at around full moon. This very simple model, but with tightly specified initial predictions about how ritual power is mobilized. The loud signal of ritual power from dark moon to full moon associates with seclusion, the other world, nighttime, bleeding or raw states, hunger or being eaten, gender inversion, and animality. An overarching metaphor equates women's blood at the beginning of the waxing moon with the blood of game animals at the end of the waxing moon, marking both as taboo. Ritual power is surrendered at full moon, with blood taboos lifted through cooking fire, allowing feasting and fertile sex. Honeymoon. We call this a time-resistant syntax. Now, archaeologically, the most distinctive behavioral change associating with our African speciation is a continent-wide shift from irregular to habitual use of red ochre pigments at around 160,000. From this point, we can safely infer a symbolic species indistinguishable from ourselves. If the ethnographic record can constrain speculation about how we became a symbolic species, then African hunter-gatherers seem particularly relevant. I'll be using the term hunter-gatherer and hunting and mothering societies interchangeably. One because it's conventional, the other because it better reflects indigenous values and current evolutionary theory. The most striking characteristic of African hunting and mothering societies is high levels of gender egalitarianism. It's precisely because of our interest in these societies that we were accused by the late David Graeber of perpetuating a myth of egalitarian origins. In the dawn of everything, restricted to the last 30,000 years, this justified ignoring everything to do with our African speciation, evolutionary theory, the associated archaeology, and treating African hunter-gatherers as of marginal significance, setting up a narrative where equality,
Can we get rid of that rubbish on the screen?
where equality and hierarchy have always been necessary complements of each other. One response to this is to use Chris and Camilla's model of origins to explore an intermediate case, an African hunting and mothering society that's highly gender egalitarian in day-to-day life, but where aspects of myth and ritual indicate some male appropriation of power. If we're on the right track, the posited time-resistant syntax to the mobilization of ritual power should inform changes in myth and ritual. So tonight, I'll be talking about selected myths and beliefs of the Hadzabe of northern Tanzania. They're a small language community of mostly former hunter-gatherers living in the Eyasi Basin, part of the Great Rift Valley. They're the only surviving hunter-gatherers in tropical or temperate zones whose hunting is focused on large game. As with other African hunting and mothering societies, for the very few still able to continue a traditional lifestyle, gender egalitarianism is the day-to-day reality of living. However, at the level of myth and ritual, the picture's more variable. Simply put, it's hard to identify a myth of matriarchy among the numerous Bushman cultures of Southern Africa. It is found among the various Bayaka forest hunter-gatherers in the Congo Basin. But men's and women's telling of it are almost mirror images of each other. Men saying that they took the reproductive aspect of women's ritual power by force, women saying that they gave it away. The Hadzabe also have a myth of patriarchy, involving a particularly humiliating overthrow of women's rule, which isn't up for debate. So with the Bushmen at one extreme and horticulturalist societies with myths of matriarchy at the other, the Hadza seem to occupy an intermediate position. Now, although this myth isn't the subject of tonight's talk, it's relevant. So here's a brief synopsis. It's named after Mambeda, the woman who used to control the cooking and distribution of sacred epeme meat, which men had to surrender to her. While the meat was cooking, she'd have sex with her beautiful wives, married women, using a zebra's penis, which she'd hunted herself with bow and arrow, dressed like a man. In the version recorded by Thea Skarnes, her overthrow is justified by reversing the logic of sex strike. Why should Mambeda sit there and make the meat come to her, to be distributed as she commands? The reversal comes about through the intervention of face-shifting animals. It's mediated through an eland, and its climax involves a magical assault on women's genitals. The myth legitimates the epeme society of initiated hunters, who now secretly consume epeme meat, supposedly belonging to the divinity. When the uninitiated in camp see smoke rising beneath a baobab tree or from a thicket of bushes a short distance away, they know that epemeko, the ko suffix indicating the female gender, has come to eat the sacred meat. An insider's perspective, at least as given to Skarnes, is that Mambeda, now called Ayadi, or Great Mother, has come to prepare the epeme feast for the men. Against this background, there must be strong countervailing forces to account for the continued gender egalitarianism in living. The Hadzabe are unusual in several respects. The sex strike model didn't predict that any extant or recent society would approximate the model's posited initial conditions, but the Hadza come surprisingly close. Their most important ritual, the epeme dance, distinct from men's epeme society, involving all women and initiated men, can only be held when there's no moon. Although its main purpose is to reinforce the complementarity of men and women, it also helps ensure the success of forthcoming hunting. By far their most productive form of hunting is from blinds by the few remaining waterholes in the dry season, restricted to nights leading up to full moon. This has enabled the Hadza to turn a season of relative resource scarcity into one of absolute abundance. Their principal origins myth consistently features nocturnal hunting with spears rather than bow and arrow. On the other hand, as the myth of matriarchy implies, they're just as much agents of historical change as anyone else. In Africa, the bow and arrow is thought to go back about 60 or 70,000 years. Its appearance presumably significantly shifted the balance away from collective to individual hunting. Men's Apeme association needs to be seen in this light. While they consume some fatty meat that would otherwise have gone to women, its principal role is to inhibit individuals controlling meat distribution, a powerful check upon would-be self-aggrandizers, ensuring that all large game animals are a public good, subdivided into men's Apeme meat, bride service meat, and meat for the people. Much more recently, the Hadzabe have been interacting with first pastoralists and then farmers for at least 5,000 years, more than twice as long as any Bushman culture. Perhaps most unusual, Hadza women have a collective initiation called mythic, involving artificial synchronized bleeding, with the public part of the ritual seeing the initiates chase down young men, hitting them with whips and their Narichanda sticks. Camilla has developed a suggestion initially made by the late James Woodburn to argue that this costly ritual is women's response to the challenge presented by men's Apeme society. So, as with the Bayaka of Western Congo, women actively contest men's claim to ritual power. It's no monopoly. Now, thanks to Woodburn and Camilla and Teoscanis, we have a fairly good understanding of Hadza rituals. In the 90s, Camilla showed that the Hadza and Bushmen share an indigenous model of the ritual construction of gender that accords with predictions of wrong species, wrong set, wrong time. In Hadza adolescent initiation rituals and the myth of matriarchy, the correspondence is primarily in the register of wrong sex, with elements of wrong species. However, for a variety of reasons, our understanding of the religious cosmology that frames ritual practice is still poor. We know that the sun, the moon, and a divinity called Haine play significant roles, but how they fit together remains obscure. Perhaps partly because of secrecy, but primarily because we don't adequately understand the gender mutability of the sun and moon and how this relates to their being above or below the horizon, particularly regarding the sun. Most often you'll hear that the sun is Ishoko, wife to the moon, Seta. But the reverse gendering is also encountered, as in this drawing by Gudo Bala. On the other hand, Ishoye, which linguists think is simply a way of addressing Ishoko, is sometimes said to be Seta, the moon, the husband of Ishoko. Both terms have been reported in appeals for hunting luck. The earliest good transcription of Hadzane has Haine as, quote, he who is greater than the sun. Haine is most closely associated with the Apeme ritual, and occasionally said to be Apeme. But in Gudo's drawing of the sun and the moon, he's dressed, in Gudo's drawing of the sun and the moon, the figure associated with the sun, is referred to as both Ishoko and Haine. He's dressed as the Epeme dancer with ostrich feather headdress, cloak, and Sengeno rattle. A possible etymology of Haine is Ha-ine, the feathered one. To an outsider, this suggests a solar associated divinity dancing at dark moon. Such play with mutability and inversion is also seen with the word for moon, Seeta, taken from the Datoga pastoralist word for both God and the sun. Another level of complication is introduced by occasional reference to the great mother of the Hadzabe, variously recorded as Ilibako, Ayadi, and Haine. In one myth, Haine is the great mother who chases away the spirit Epeme for punishing women too severely for breaking Epeme rules. Now, rather than trying to tackle these issues directly, which I don't think is possible on current evidence and knowledge, I'll take a more indirect approach. Earlier this year, Camilla gave a talk about cannibalistic ogress mothers-in-law in Hadza mythology. She tentatively linked these to a little-known character called Kohl, whose primary meaning is Mantis, also considered a bad spirit. Tonight, I'm going to attempt to tease out the multiple symbolic fields this character inhabits. Far from being the marginal figure that is her public persona, I'll argue that Kohl repeatedly takes us to the core of Hadza cosmology, but generally by hints, associations, and implications, rarely explicitly. As the eyes of the moon, she uniquely links together sex, hunting, ritual, and cosmology. A character possessing, on the one hand, invariant structure-imparting qualities consistent with our binary template of ritual power, and on the other hand, a vehicle for expressing the contested gender politics of Hadza society. The primary materials will also be mythic narratives recorded by Kohl-Larsen in the 1930s, published in German in the 50s, by Elena Mouriki in 2004-5, and Daudi Peterson in 2010. But the key to understanding these stories is a set of brief comments given to Elena right at the end of her fieldwork. As her partner, I was fortunate enough to be with her during most of the fieldwork. Unfortunately, she decided to abandon research before getting stuck into the analysis of the stories, but she's provided access to her translated narratives and the field notes. First, though, some background on Mantis and symbolic culture. Across temperate and tropical zones, Mantis figure prominently in symbolic beliefs. Several anatomical and behavioral traits make them good to think with. They have ferocious raptorial forelimbs. They're solitary ambush hunters, capable of taking prey 3 times their body size. They have large eyes and can turn their heads almost 180 degrees. They're heavily reliant on camouflage, but when threatened, they can startle a potential predator, rearing up, opening their wings, often to reveal brilliant, brightly colored designs. The females are generally bigger than the males and may become sexual cannibals at any point during a male's advance, including during sex. Like snakes, some species molt their skin as they grow to adult size. Cross-culturally, along with chameleons, mantids are among the most widely distributed oracular creatures or bearers of omens. Among the Southern African Khoi pastoralists at the time of Dutch colonization, their principal divinity and the mantis shared the name Gawab, mantis being an emissary of Gawab, capable of bringing good or bad fortune. It was consulted in various circumstances. Under missionizing influence, the term became restricted to Mantis and now means grass devil, synonymous with Satan. Most famous and most relevant here was the role of the mantis in the beliefs of the Xam Bushmen of South Africa, recorded by Blake and Lloyd in the 1870s. Mantis was identified with Kaggen, trickster, creator, and protector of certain antelope. He primarily appears in stories of first creation, when animals were people, where he's the ultimate transgressor of social rules, but as likely to be tricked as the perpetrator, and with a couple of gender ambiguous traits. In one critical myth cycle, he creates both the eland antelope, and the moon, the eland symbolically expressing the movement between wolves in Xam ritual, and the moon governing economic, ritual, and sexual periodicities. Kaggen's creative aspect is linked with honey. He grew the eland by daily applications of honey, and he gave the most important meat animals their distinctive colors and markings by applying different kinds of honey. His creation of the moon is because, furious at the killing of his eland, he's plunged the earth into darkness by piercing the eland's gallbladder. Unable to see, he creates the moon from a shoe or an ostrich feather, etiologically said to allow the Xam to hunt by waterholes at night. In the lived world of the Xam, Kaggen still tried to protect his favorite antelope, the eland, the hartebeest, and the hemsbok. Uniquely, he could transform his appearance. He might, for instance, assume the form of a snake in order to startle hunters and alert the prey animals to their presence. In another episode, to distract gemsbok hunters, he appeared as a hare. But his hunting interventions typically occur during the uncertain outcome, after a poisoned arrow has hit an animal, but before it had been tracked, before it was known whether it had died and whether it was fat or lean. During this interval, there was a magical connection between hunter and prey, which Kaggen would try and break, getting the hunters or members of his family to behave in ways that sympathetically would cause the antelope to revive. Placed under restrictions similar to a monarchical girl, the hunter might find himself tormented. Kaggen's tricks included getting him to piss, scratch himself, or better still, to squash a louse, as its blood would be on the hand that handled the arrow that hit the eland. So, like menstrual blood, it would cool the arrow poison. A guardian companion to the hunter would stoke up the fire, quote, to drive the mantis away so that he may not tease us. With this background, I turn to the Hadza mantis. Although ethnographers and anthropologists have been reporting on the Hadza for over a century, until 10 years ago, the word had never appeared in any publication. When it did appear in a collaborative effort by the Hadzabe, assisted by Daudi Peterson, there was no mention of mantis. Was the devil, a non-Hadza concept. 3 years ago, a speculative non-academic book appeared in which the author, John Saul, had commissioned a young Hadza man, Shani Manola, to ask older men whether the mantis had any significance for them. They'd replied that if a hunter encountered a grey mantis, he'd be sure to encounter lots of game and that his arrow would find its mark. One informant added, "It's very important for our culture," but no further information was obtained. In unpublished material, the earliest record of Kohl is in Dorothea Blake's notebooks of 1930, where it's a stick insect, directly associated with baobab seed pods. The contemporary linguist, Bonnie Sands, first gave the Hadzane name for mantis as grammatically female, like epemeko. It covers both mantids and stick insects. It has two other meanings: the occipital bone at the back of the head and a certain spirit. Another linguist, Kirk Miller, thinks that the word's unusual phonetic features suggest that the three meanings are meanings of the same word, not coincidental lookalikes, with mantis probably primary. He found that it was a bad spirit, of the kind seen in dreams, not a spirit of the ancestors. Teascanis learned that the Hadza consider the head as the portal for communication with spirits, that it's particularly dangerous to walk around the head of a dead person or of a dead eland, which shares spirit with the Hadzabe. Sans was told the same if a wife walked around the head of her sleeping husband. The dead are buried with their heads orientated to one of the sacred mountains, Sanzako, Anao, and Dundubiai. As we'll see shortly, Okoko is associated with Sanzako and Anao. So it's possible, therefore, that the anatomical meaning of Okoko is connected to these beliefs. And it's certainly worth noting that the Juhuasi Bushmen identify the top of the spinal column immediately below the occipital bone as the place where Num potency of healing and trance is released. Elena learned the word Okoko as a tongue twister to get the feel of one of the three click consonants. She'd been given its meaning as mantis and a place at the back of the head. She'd asked about the mantis out of simple curiosity, knowing it was important to the Xam Bushmen in Xam Bushman beliefs, and that in wider Tanzanian society, it was considered a shetani, the Swahili term for a bad spirit. Her inquiries were generally met with blank faces or the terse comment, "No, it's just an insect." But a month into fieldwork, she was given a story by an old man where Okoko was an old woman wanting sex with a handsome young man. Later, she was told by several women that Okoko was used as a scare figure to warn children about the dangers of wandering off in the bush. She'd also seen Hadza being concerned one night when a mantis came close to the fire. That was all she could discover until the day we were due to leave, but had been unavoidably delayed. A key informant invited us into his house. His wife left, allowing him to share things he otherwise couldn't. He began by saying that Okoko sat inside the hollow or cave of a baobab used by the Hadzabe to eat the honey inside it. I should say that in the Eyasi Basin, certain baobabs serve as cultural landscape markers, much like the peaks around the basin's edge. They're also of huge economic importance, the seed pods providing a virtually year-round source of highly nutritious porridge, and their most abundant kind of honey coming from hives in hollow baobab trunks. He went on. Very often, in old stories, Okoko caught Hadzabe as well as the children who got lost, or she'd get them lost and imprison them in one of the many baobab caves, or send them to Zanzako or Anao. All three were places of Okoko. He added that there's an Apeme song about her living inside a small baobab that produces particularly sweet fruit, sweet because she lives there. He went on to provide other crucial pieces of information. Only Okoko can transform itself to whatever it wants to be. It could be said of the Apeme dancer that he is the husband of Okoko. Okoko was liable to grab the hunter's arrows mid-flight, or if an arrow struck, she may go and remove it so that the animal would live. The mantis is special, quote, because it refuses to go and stay with Ishoye. The mantis is the child of the moon, and Aqua Bemaseeta, literally eyes of the moon. Now, even when explanatory remarks were given, much of this seemed pretty enigmatic, largely because of our poor grasp of Hadza cosmology. But Elena was particularly struck by the similarity between Okoko and Kaggen's interventions in hunting. So I'll begin with Okoko and the children. Hadza women told Elena that Okoko was used as a scare figure to warn children of the dangers of wandering off in the bush, that she might catch and eat them. Two very short stories were given relating to this belief. In one, Okoko would bewitch the children with a magic or poison and send them to her house and finish them. In the other, should children meet her, they'd been told to say that the beads they wore had magic potency, and then she'd leave them alone. This probably relates to Kelaguko, charms worn by children so as not to get lost. Kelaguko are small aromatic tubers of a papyrus-like sedge, with the most esteemed said to come from springs around the sacred mountains. Their principal use is as a mediating substance in relation with the spirit world when addressing ancestors or divinities at one of these mountains, or as part of healing in an Apeme dance, typically concerning breaches of Apeme rules. So irrespective of Okoko being glossed as a bad spirit, she's accorded similar respect to the most potent forces. 70 years earlier, the Hadzabe seem to have had a more detailed version of this story, which Kohl-Larsen titled The Gogotoko. As with all the stories tonight, this is a précis. These were people of great intelligence. They wore beads on their feet and lived on Mount Sanzaku. They would come down into the land of Hadzabe and magically take on the appearance of Hadzabe. They would entice children and young adults to come in search of honey or rock hyraxes. Once they'd got them across the Gilibao stream, the Hadza would lose their mind and become totally lost, disorientated. They'd be taken to the Gogotoko's subterranean dwellings on Sanzaku, where they'd be asked, what were the things on the Gogotoko's feet? Should they name or point to them, they'd be eaten. Eventually, Seeta, the moon, comes down to earth and instructs the Hadzabe that those taken by the Gogotoko mustn't point to or name the beads, but instead say, they're used to make arrow poison. If we touch them, we'll die. If they followed this rule, the Gogotoko would place a string of white mussel shells around their necks, and they'd be able to find their way home. A final episode of Gogotoko killing and eating, Hadza, sees Seeta turn them into porcupines. When Elena summarized this to a young Hadza man, he immediately said it was the story of Okoko. The Gogotoko and Okoko get children lost and eat them. They're cave dwellers in the most sacred places and can change their appearance. I'll come on to the significance of the white mussel shortly, after considering Okoko's relationship to the baobab more closely. I'm going to split the story Elena was told about Okoko as an old woman with an eye for young men into two, using the introduction as the link to a fuller story Kohl-Larsen gave, which also links back to the Gogotoko. A young man met Okoko picking unspecified fruit. Okoko was an insect, but also a person wearing clothes. An argument ensued about whether this was appropriate food. The youth threw burning coals into the impala skin cloak covering Okoko's back. She screamed and cursed the young man. When you sleep, I'll come to you in your dreams. Kohl-Larsen's story of Hong Kong Gosha expands on this introduction. Gosha was an old man who lived in a cave. His favorite food was baobab fruit, baobab flowers, which he collected in his cloak. But he might also surprise Hadza women out digging tubers, when he'd collect all the waste from their cleaning the tubers. He also crept into Hadza camps at night to steal berries and tubers put aside for the kids' breakfast. One day, a party of hunters meet Gosha. The senior man present gave a spitting blessing, accompanied with the exclamation, Ishoko. This, or Ishoye, being the standard form of requesting success in the hunt. Gosha replied courteously, my children, I've dreamt that today you'll find meat. Now everyone was giving the spitting greeting to the old man. However, a youth arrives late. Instead of being courteous, he throws a burning log into the cloak containing the flowers on Gosha's back. Gosha shouts out in pain. He exclaims to the youth, you'll regret this. I won't take back your good fortune in getting meat today, but I'm very angry. The youth rejoins the others without reporting the incident. Shortly afterwards, he kills a big eland bull. That night, Gosha crept into the hunting camp and magically moved aside those sleeping next to his assailant. Having gathered together all the burning embers of the camp, he threw them over the youth, who screamed and moaned in agony for hours before dying. But Gosha wasn't finished. When the hunting party returned home with the remaining eland meat, he came again to the unmarried youths and secretly took away their meat. One woke up. Thinking a hyena had come into camp, he threw a burning log into the darkness, which again hit Gosha's back. He suffered the same fate as his predecessor. Nobody knew this was Gosha's doing, attributing the deaths to accidents. That was until Haine came down to inform them and instruct them how to respect Gosha, that by doing so, they'd get meat. If you see him, spit on him and say, we want you to give us luck so that we can have meat. But you must fear him very much. But the people wanted to find food without Gosha's interventions. So Haine said, don't worry, I'll remove him from your land. He instructed them, when you find a lot of honey, smear some onto a large rock. Gosha will come and eat it, and I'll transform him into a great white mussel shell, sorry. I must mention, sorry. I must mention that Camilla was once with a group of women who just set out on a gathering trip when they encountered a mantis. They immediately turned back, declaring that they'd find nothing that day. So let's take stock. The preferred foods of Gosha and Gosha, fruit, nectar, honey, are all raw, sweet foods. And she also pilfers from women's gathering. While collecting these foods, they're assaulted in some way by an ignorant youth, throwing fire on her back, presumably her back. Gosha's preferred food, baobab flowers, reinforces the identity with Kohl, who's particularly associated with baobabs and their fruit. Critically, baobab flowers, full of nectar, only open at night and have dropped by early morning, rapidly turning bitter. So Gosha's gathering was almost certainly nocturnal. The vengeance of both characters on their assailants also takes place at night. So it seems that both associate with night's darkness, possibly explaining why they're assaulted with fire. The diet of Gosha and Gosha suggests an identity with stick insects rather than mantids, but as noted, the name covers both. we've already established that Okoko, like the Gogotoko, also eats Hadzabe, presumably raw. Onkongosha has the power to make game abundant for the hunters and to ensure that their arrows find their mark, precisely matching what was said of the grey mantis to Shani Manola. But as made clear by Onkongosha and Mouriki's key informant, the reverse equally applies. Onkongosha could have reversed the hunting blessing, and Okoko can protect the game, ensuring hunters miss or remove their arrows so that the animals recover. They're creatures of the bush, at least partially analogous to masters or mistresses of game animals. The behavioral complement of the myths is that the sight of Okoko sends women's gathering parties back to camp, but assures men of hunting success. Finally, both the Gogotoko and Onkongosha have a relationship to white mussel shells, which, to my knowledge, doesn't appear in any other stories. So what's that about? Again, according to Eleanor's key informant, white mussels, black on the outside, lustrous white on the inside, are found in the Yaida swamp of the Ayasi Basin. They're considered fragments of the moon and a gift from Seeta. They're used as spoons to eat baobab porridge, tafabe berries, and to scoop and drink liquid fat from the top of the cooking pot. Speculatively, men may have used them for this purpose in their epeme feasts. The Gogotoko's gift of them as a charm is functionally identical to Kelaguko. Mouriki's informant gave another use as a protective charm against what appears to have been a salivary gland infection called Sagungabi, which, according to a provisional Hadzane dictionary, is believed to be caused by eating certain unspecified meat. An account given to Kohl-Larsen described this, this probably refers to the most serious breach of epeme rules, unauthorized eating of epeme meat. An account given to Kohl-Larsen described this as causing swelling of the neck. So, irrespective of the precise connotations and meanings, it's clear that Okoko is related to white mussel shells. And through them, it seems that she has a relationship to the moon, which for the moment remains unclear. Now I'll now turn to stories concerning Okoko's sexual aspect, picking up from where Okoko swore revenge on the youth who'd assaulted her while fruit gathering. Recall her parting words. "When you sleep, I'll come to you in your dreams." The man returned home, but didn't tell his wife what had happened. That night, Okoko came, but not as a phantom. She chased the man's wife away and demanded sex with him, saying, "I'm more beautiful than your wife." He repeatedly refused. She persisted. The man, and then his father, tried to kill her, initially by brute force, followed by increasingly elaborate tricks. But each time she comes back to life. She apparently gets her way because although the father chops off Okoko's head with an axe, she resurrects and bears 2 children, telling them to go and kill and eat the father. This doesn't actually happen. She then tells the father to stretch or straighten her legs. This becomes comprehensible when we recall the opening remark that Okoko was both insect and human, suggesting that she was trying to lose mantid attributes and become more human. In a key episode, the father, having finally agreed to marry Okoko on the grounds that he's of more appropriate age, carves a Narichanda stick to give it to her as a mythic. He marries Okoko to the Narichanda stick with some suggestion that it's passed off as his son. The translation's a bit unclear there. A Narichanda stick is a decorated ritual object made by male relatives at the birth of a baby girl and again at her initiation as a maitoko. It has a head and a tail end. It's kept through life and figures prominently in both women's collective mythical initiation and is borrowed for a boy's initiation into a peme. Women name their sticks, and it's one of the objects an peme dancer may dance in the name of. According to Kohl-Larsen, older women at the forefront of the women dancing around a peme would hold a Naricanda stick. They would also bar the way if a peme tried to get closer to the younger women. Returning to the story, holds the Naricanda stick and sees a man with hair, legs, and everything. She's now living patrilocally with this husband Naricanda stick. He commands her to make fire, fetch water, and fetch fatty meat from her mother-in-law. The Naricanda husband tells not to fill the pot with ordinary water, but with her piss. He then instructs her to drink it, telling her it's liquid fat. She does so and dies. They throw the corpse in a ravine. The next morning, she's resurrected. Only stayed dead when given a pair of eland hide shoes. She walked about in them and they spontaneously caught fire. The constant death and resurrection makes exemplary of ritual potency. Again, we have the opposition to fire. She tries to be a human wife, but it just can't work. The urine drinking can be compared to a Xam story where Dassi, the rock hyrax and Kaggen's wife, together with the bees, piss into ostrich eggshell drinking vessels and get Kaggen and Kwanmana to drink from them. Kaggen curses Dassi, but her mother, out gathering, senses the curse and starts bleeding from the nose, causing an avalanche of rocks to bury Kaggen and Kwanmana. The piss drinking arguably bears comparison to Manbeda's humiliation, and Okoko's final defeat is also brought about through the medium of an eland. We get a clearer picture of Okoko's relationship to marital sex through the vignette of a story concerning the origins of reproductive sex given to Daudi Peterson. In the time of the Gelanabe ancestors, men initially knew nothing about making children, having sex between women's toes. Heine wished to instruct them and selected a man to inform. Forget about women's toes, aim between the thighs. To allow him to share this secret with other men, Heine provided an eland for him to hunt, so he could call on the men to help carry the meat home. Okoko, the devil, appeared. He was jealous, not wanting the secret to be known, and tried to thwart Heine's plan. But the men set Okoko's head aflame. Unperturbed, Okoko returned and made the sun set quickly, hoping to make the men vulnerable, but to no avail. The man was able to share his secret. So here, Okoko is male and clearly stands in opposition to marital sex. In calling him the devil, the narrators almost certainly used the Swahili term shetani. Recall that the same fate befell the Khoikhoi Gawab. The men's assault on him, setting his head aflame, not only repeats what's now a well-established pattern, it provides stronger grounds for suspecting that a secondary meaning of Okoko, naming the back of the head, is intrinsically related to the primary identities as Mantis and a bad spirit. But the meaning of as Mantis isn't mentioned in the story, intended for the general public, may be deliberate. In the arthropod glossary at the end of By the Light of a Million Fires, which includes Hadzane names for several grasshoppers and crickets, Okoko is missing. The question arising is, who would already know the secret of reproductive sex and have reason to be jealous of men discovering it? In 1930, Dorothea Blake was told by a man that when women see the moon, they are ill. 30 years ago, James Woodburn confirmed to us the normative belief that women have their periods at dark or new moon. The belief was confirmed, repeated to Eleanor by several women, while acknowledging that each woman has her own time. More significantly, she was told at the same time that the moon is the brother of all women. Now, this aligns with other African hunter-gatherer beliefs. For example, the Mbangeli of Congo-Brazzaville say that a woman's biggest husband is the moon. Wherever women have a relationship with an anthropomorphized moon, it's coded as incestuous. So Nkoko's opposition to Heine's plan to inform men about fertile sex firmly associates him/her with the dark new moon. The only magic in the story is Nkoko's ability to make the sun set quickly, bringing to mind Kaggen's ability to cause utter darkness by piercing the eland's gallbladder. There's another Hadza story where the main character has this ability, providing grounds for linking her to Nkoko. This is the story of Aliako or Oriako, which Camilla presented earlier in the year. A version was collected by Kohl-Larsen which he called the magic horn. Eleanor recorded two versions, one narrator calling it the story of Daigwe. Alia means baboon's bottom, referring to this prominent bright red protrusion of bare skin. Kirk Miller was told that mythologically, it could be kilometers long. In Kohl-Larsen's version, Aliako is an older woman living alone with her unnamed beautiful daughter. Aliako has this magical appendage which retracts and extends, hardens, softens, which she uses to kill her male victims. In Eleanor's version, it's her daughter who bears the name of this organ, Oria. Daigwe sits on the mountain with her daughter, who shines. She tells the daughter to go down and fetch water. A man is on a lookout rock and has spotted a large group of eland, far more than usual, by the spring. Some eye-catching movement startles them, something brilliant, likened to bright green foliage. The man goes down to the water to discover that the brilliance which denied him an eland was Oriako. He instantly falls for her and insists on returning to her place, despite being warned that her mother eats people. Daigwe is delighted. Even though it was only midday, she orders the sun to set quickly so that the young couple would go to bed. When they'd stopped giggling, Daigwe came, dragging her Oriasa. It slithered and swelled, and suddenly it struck him dead. Nga! Dead. She deposits the corpse in a cave for future consumption. The drama is repeated with a succession of brothers, but the last man, the youngest brother or nephew, battles with Daigwe over her ability to make the sun set. He establishes that the sun hereafter will determine its own setting. He vanquishes the old woman through deception, substituting a wooden effigy, placing it where he should be lying next to the daughter. When the Alia comes slithering into their hut, he chops off its tip and spears the old woman. In Kohl-Larsen's version, he burns a magic wood that summons rain and lightning. He resurrects her, only to consign her to the bush as a rhinoceros. He resurrects the brothers the same way. As with the Bushmen, the Hadza cultural epitome of brilliance is a monarchical girl, shining with eland fat and decorated with lots of beads. This startles the eland in much the same way as Kaggen might. As for the carved effigy, it's tempting to see this as playing a similar role to the Narichanda stick that Okoko took as her husband. In any event, Alia's fantastic appendage invites comparison with Mambeda's zebra's cock, while her ability to make the sun set quickly suggests an identity with Okoko, who also appreciates beautiful young men. Mouriki's field assistant thought that the Alia made its own sound, similar to the Ngaribi bells, which we'll come on to now. With the link between Okoko and the cannibalistic monsters firmly established, we can turn to a story more appropriately called Daigwe, which Kohl-Larsen called The Lion with the Bell. A young maiden ties a bell to her right leg. Through hunger and illness, she dies. Her death causes everyone to abandon the camp. She comes back to life as a lion man, Daigwe, who's now ravenous. Having eaten all the rubbish and scraps in the abandoned camp, Daigwe finds a new diet, Hadzabe, but only the plump young ones. While stalking them, Daigwe stuffs the bell with grass, but removes it at the moment of launching an attack. Once killed, he'd sling the victim over his shoulder and take it back to his cave to eat. Haine eventually intervenes, throwing an elephant at Daigwe, who tramples her to dust. In other versions, it's the huge monster, Dudukwe, who accomplishes this. Haine then reassembles Daigwe's body parts for the sole purpose of taking the right leg and the right arm to hang on a tree. The Hadzabe find these 4 days later and remove the bell, taking it home with them. Haine returned to the tree to take the two limbs, declaring that henceforth they'd be lions. Lions are primarily dark moon hunters. The connection between Daigwe and bells is still present, but possibly fading. Kirk Miller elicited that Daigweko is an old word for someone who wore bells on the ankle and sang, danced, and made music, which, as we'll see shortly, is pretty clearly a description of an Epeme dancer. The interval of 4 days at the end of the story seems important. According to Eleanor's key informant, this is the interval from the first appearance of the new moon when the rules of the eyes of the moon applied. Hadzabe would thank the new moon on each of these days, but believed that any animal killed would be lean. Only from the 4th day would they start to put on fat, until full moon. It's a theme we see elsewhere. For example, in Kohl-Larsen's story about the disobedient wife who ate baobab fruit immoderately. This caused her to bleed from the nose, a contagious condition that spread to everyone else in camp, even though they'd hardly eaten a thing. They all bled for 2 nights and 3 days. They would have died, but Ishoko came down with his wife, Haine. Sun and moon came to earth together, which only happens at the appearance of the new moon, low in the western horizon at sunset, quickly following the sun down. Daigwe's story never specifies the significance of the bell on the right leg because the listeners would have known this. A chain of small metal bells called Ngaribe are strung onto the right leg of the Epeme dancer, who, during the dance, brings this foot down with a powerful stomp. Teoscanus was told that the sound of the bells connotes the spiritual presence of Eland at the dance, specifically the loud knee clicks of a mature bull. Ingaribite, the belled one, is the respect term for Eland when hit with a poisoned arrow. The sound of the knee clicks would be most salient during nightstand hunting by waterholes, announcing the approach of the most esteemed and ritually potent of animals, uniquely sharing spirit with the Hadzabe. Of all antelope, Eland's the most habitual nocturnal drinker. Among the Juhuasi, identical sound symbolism is used in both boys' and girls' initiation rituals. on the occasion of his first
Repeat that bit. I don't think anyone heard it.
right. Among the Juhuasi, identical sound symbolism is used in both boys and girls' initiation rituals. On the occasion of his first eland kill and her ontological transformation into both an eland and a hunter. It is said of the monarchical girl of the Juhuasi, she has shot an eland. The Hadzabe say of her, she has shot a zebra. The Daigwe story strongly suggests that the sound symbolism of the bells extends to lions, and that the largest but most docile of antelope is being linked with the fiercest predator. Linguistic support for this paradoxical union is that both animals share the same triumphal name, hubue, used when killed or as a speech act commanding its death. Lions and eland also share a unique adjective appreciating their beauty when running, iyadela, which is also the eland's praise name. There are two other contexts where the bells appear in ritual. A boy's initiation into Maito, as a Maito, into the Epeme society. They're dressed in women's kangas, and on their feet, you can see in the grass here, you can't quite see on this image, but anyway, you've got this in the way as well. The bells are just here anyway, and he's also wearing some. And by young women during the Maitokov ritual, when the coalition of initiates are chasing men, young men in particular, whipping them with long saplings and striking them with their Narachanda sticks. One of Eleanor's informants drew attention to the parallel between the Epeme dancer and the Maitokol because they wear the bells, adding that if anyone touched or harmed an Epeme dancer or Maitokol, the offender would get very thin. Both women with the bells have them on their right legs only, unlike the Maito. So returning to the story, we can now suggest that the reason the young initiate, the young woman, who became Daigwe, put on the bell in the first place was that she was a female initiate. Cross-culturally, initiation associates with hunger. Typically, food is restricted, while illness is a common term for menstruation. The whole process is seen as a temporary death followed by resurrection in a new identity. The indigenous comparison with the Epeme dancer allows us to propose that when she put on the bell, she too was summoning the presence of eland, like the Epeme dancer. But in her temporary death, during seclusion, she became an aggressive male lion and was stuck in that state. Now, this may be the only link between Hadza girl initiates and the eland, but it's highly significant as this is the most prominent symbolic identification made across numerous Bushman cultures. So far, the connection between Daigwe and Okoko primarily lies in a shared identity as ogresses and their ability to make the sun set quickly. But Daigwe is also another name for Mambeta before her overthrow. In Tea's version, following Mambeta's acceptance of the new order and adopting the title of Ayadi Mambeta, Great Mother, it ends with the words, Daigwiko, she said, no more. Mambeta renounces her former identity. The coming of Ayadi, either to receive or to prepare a Epeme meat, depending on outside or inside meanings, can also be referred to as the arrival of Epemeko. Epemeko is described in surprisingly similar terms to Okoko. Eleanor's Hadzane field assistant, Susanna Zengo, said, you may meet Epemeko in the bush. She might appear like a person. Maybe she releases the animals. Maybe she makes them fat. She is very dangerous. It's Epimeko who decides, that's the quote, it's Epimeko who decides whether a youth is mature enough to be initiated into a peme. If so, she'll release a fat peme animal for him to kill, the basic prerequisite for initiation. Jumapili, a young man, described this. Epimeko, she's watching. She lives maybe with the animals when they die. Maybe she gives meat over here while she is washing, and she sends it there. And she watches to see if it is very fat, this animal. Yes, she will send this animal. Epimeko will say, so-and-so, young man, that's it, that's for him. She lives only in the bush. If you light a fire, it's very bad indeed. We're very afraid. She may appear like a manati, that ogre, or like the Hadzabe. She may come to greet you. And like this, she says, thank you, Elena. But instead, she is not Elena. It is something else. It's like this. The minor detail that Epimeko might release a fat animal while she is washing is intriguing. Washing is ritually significant at the end of menstruation, symbolically associated with the dark moon. Kohl-Larsen reported a former Hadzane practice where a man anointed his arrows with red ochre when his wife had washed herself in the stream at the end of menses. Without this, he'd get nothing. Presumably another example of the rules prevailing during the eyes of the moon. And like Epimeko, is of course antithetical to fire. So it seems that Okoko, the Gogotoko, Daigwe, Konkongosha, Ayadi, Mambeta, and Epimeko are all different aspects of the same being of ritual or ritual potency associated with waxing moon. If you want to make finer distinctions, overseeing the rules of the eyes of the moon, Okoko, and by extension, the Gogotoko and Daigwe associate with dark moon to first quarter, when animals are lean. Epimeko and Ayadi with the second quarter, the waxing gibbous moon. Recall that Eleanor asked, why is Okoko special or different? Her informant's full answer was, because it refuses to go and stay with Ishoye. Okoko used to be close with Ishoye. Because Ishoye loves the people along with the animals, and Ishoye helps the people, so the mantis refuses. I don't want to stay with you because you're a friend of everyone. And for me, my food is to get them lost in the bush. And if I was to be your friend, I couldn't kill people. So I'm going to the bush. I'll be special in the bush and I'll carry on my ways. It's her and only her who's able to change her face. The Okoko is the child of the moon, the eyes of the moon. And the moon gives us animals by changing, transformation. When it's small, the Hadza will get animals without fat. When it's big, they can get meat with fat. It is the moon that's given the animals, and it's a friend of the people, especially the Hadzabe. Okoko got angry because she was prohibited from carrying on killing the Hadza. That's why when a Hadza hits an animal with an arrow, Okoko can remove his arrow and the animal can't die because Okoko is hungry for human meat, because she was prohibited by the moon, because she's not allowed to kill people. That's why she does this to the animals. Just about done.
Marathon.
Genetically, the ancestors of the Bushmen and the Hadzabe are thought to have diverged about 50,000 years ago, or more than 50,000 years ago. Some archaeological evidence suggests that they've been culturally isolated from each other for more than 20,000 years. But as we've seen some remarkable symbolic correspondences covering ritual constructions of gender, counterintuitive, near identical expressions for monarchical girls, ritual sound symbolism, the importance of eland, and in some attributes ascribed to the mantis. Kaggen and Kohl-Larsen play very different roles in Xam and Hadzabe culture. Kaggen being the most prominent mythical and cosmological figure, Kohl-Larsen appearing marginal. The shared traits are consistent with our posited syntax to the mobilization of ritual power. The differences appear to arise from the Hadzabe's historical myth of matriarchy. Kohl-Larsen is cast into a role somewhat resembling the 13th fairy in Sleeping Beauty, turning a blessing into a curse. But whereas the 13th fairy is safely contained in a fairy tale, and the lunar menstrual periodicity she represents has been thoroughly put aside, Kohl-Larsen continues to wield formidable power in the present through her direct connection to the dark moon Epeme dance at the very heart of Hadzabe culture.
Spoke a little bit over time.
Well,
Is that all you can say?
should we, rather than risk losing
How
the
much are that?
What
picture?
about the next picture? If you haven't seen the next picture,
Oh,
the ankles.
that was the ankles. We did.
There
Did
we
we
are.
see that? And it's only on the right ankles.
Right leg.
Because that's so amazing because
Mm.
I took that picture
Yeah.
without knowing what I was doing.
Yeah,
No
but
idea
you got it. You
that
got it.
those ankles were covered.
Mm. I'm just going to put the syntax up there, and so we don't lose the picture in case we have that share screen losing the picture for us. So we won't lose the picture. There is still some time for some questions if anybody would like to ask questions after that fantastic, intricate. Right,
I've got a
Chris.
question about the eyes of the moon. It's such a fantastic or extraordinary concept. And I presume it's about the direction of gaze, isn't it? Whose gaze is it? I mean, we all know about sort of the male gaze that women can get fed up with. And we also know about the evil eye when in so many parts of the world when a woman is menstruating gives you the evil eye. Is that do you think the many-eyed moon is kind of linked to the idea that when you've killed an animal, when you've killed an animal, you must look at the moon? I mean, presumably it's all about which way the gaze is directed, isn't it?
And it's also, yes, that, and also whether the moon is visible or not. When the moon is absent, I think the eyes of the moon become particularly significant when the moon is invisible. So they're also, it's not just Kohl-Larsen who is eyes of the moon. I think Morning Star and the Pleiades are also eyes of the moon.
Oh, right.
So they're the moon keeping a tab on what's going on in the moon's absence, in a sense.
Question.
I haven't been following the lecture series or things, so it seemed implicit for that word usually was it inhabit, the sort of the meat or the
Epeme.
Epeme.
Yeah.
It seems you have like a various different meanings.
Yes, it's a multivocalic term. On the one hand, it refers most of the large game animals are called Epeme animals. Certain cuts of meat from those animals is called Epeme meat. Then you have a initiated men's Epeme society where supposedly the Epeme meat is eaten by the spirit Epeme, but actually the initiated men eat it. And then you also have the monthly Epeme dance, which is the most important ritual, where the dancer is the shadow or the spirit of Epeme.
Which is this. This is like the Epeme dance.
And is that a female, the Epeme dancer?
No,
Or both?
no, it's very decidedly male in the dance context. But as we've seen, epimeko can be is female. So like never get too fixated on male, female, because you'll find something, you'll find the opposite with the Hadza. You know, I mean, they'll say both.
And they're mixing it deliberately, and it's probably changing through time around the lunar cycle.
That was one thing that was very clear, was that it was all very perceived.
Yeah. And I suspect that part of what's going on is like the sun and the moon are seen as a bit like a married couple, and that they had a row and they're constantly chasing each other and never catching up. But I think they do catch up kind of when they're both out of sight. And that the Epeme dancer is both the sun and dark moon. It's the sun below when it's set, and it's a dark moon. So it's when they're together. So I think the Epeme dancer connotes the potency of both in a sense. But you see very little magic potency attaching to the sun. It's all around the moon.
That's because it's all around darkness. And as Lévi-Strauss points out in his full volume mythology, right across the Americas, north and south, the sun and the moon aren't even just thought of as separate divinities or separate creatures. You've just got this massive star, which either is or isn't dark, which is either visible or not. So the sun and moon are sort of different aspects of the same being. And it is a very weird, very, very weird coincidence that on this particular planet of ours, seen from Earth, the sun and the moon, despite the fact that the sun's so much further away, and occupy the same sort of space within the spectrum, you can have an eclipse with the moon in front of the sun. And that seems to be that weird coincidence, if you presume it's a coincidence, well, it must be a coincidence. It's really exploited in world mythology.
I was so I really wish I had brought my Narechanda stick, because quite clearly Narechanda sticks are really important and interesting, because you bringing out those details of her being married to a Narechanda stick as part when they're trying to kill Kohl. Narechanda sticks are Tears found that they again have real gender ambiguity and are associated they're basically a male. A Narechanda stick is like a male person with a named kind of relationship to a relative, and belongs, yes, to a girl going through her initiation, as we've seen the young women running, but also to Maito boys at the initiation, that they have that stick as their companion. So when they're talking about this marriage to Narechanda stick, it does sound as though it's really referring to something like Maitoko. It's something, after all, they're the wives. The Maitos are the wives of Mameroko, so that it's kind of all part of that story. And of course, Daigwe's.
And it makes sense of the otherwise sort of enigmatic remark of Eleanor's key informant when he says the Epeme dancer is married, is the husband of
and when you talked about Kohl-Larsen, you're suggesting that Kohl-Larsen was right, that in the 1930s they actually had Narechanda sticks in the Epeme ritual being used to try to keep the Epeme dancer from the young women, that it may actually be real, because Thea and myself, we didn't see that present in Epeme that we've been present at. But there's something here about an aspect of male appropriation of the Narechanda sticks, perhaps, going on. But it's kind of, they're passing. Narechanda sticks are owned by women. Women's.
The boys have to borrow them from someone.
The boys have to borrow them from a kin's person.
Is it perhaps the woman that runs after him with the Narechanda stick and hits him in it?
No, I would think it's kin, but that woman would be like a potential wife or lover. That woman, she would, but yeah, there's something very significant. The other thing was, from this Mzeatimani who told the stories, he was trying to tell me about the eyes of the moon, but my Swahili was not good enough, because he was talking about the lion, so it's Daikweko, being the ones that would hunt and eat you in the first period of the moon, when before the moon sets at Sato, like after 9 o'clock, and he had a horizon where the moon would set, and he would know, oh, we've gone somewhere, what have I done? Yeah, so that's this. A lot of this starts to add up very nicely. Yeah, I don't know why that happened or what happened. Something happened. I'm going to stop share at this point and say, oh, we've still got the camera. Fantastic. Are there Zoom questions at all? Does anybody on Zoom want some? There's some chat here, but I don't know if anyone wants to put in. Elena, did you want to say anything? Somebody's asking, can we attach significance to the fact the elder lady with the beautiful daughter would go after the young men only after the sun was down, or was this purely pragmatic?
No, she needs darkness.
Yeah.
She is a creature of the night's darkness.
Absolutely. Sure. Any other questions on the Zoom? Yeah. Thanks.
I'm imagining to a lot of you haven't been coming to these lectures. None of this makes
Too much sense.
These stories, but what?
Even when you've heard it half a dozen times, it's not any better.
Well, it should be said that so much of this material is really raw and new. Yeah, Ian's been digging it out of Eleanor's notes, plus combining with the old German stories.
In other words, they keep changing what they're lecturing. They keep changing.
Well, we're meant to, but this is like, yeah, it's novel research on some of the very oldest religious concepts of humanity. So, even if that's why it's really worth digging into it. And I hope people are getting a sort of sense of how this is operating around the lunar cycle in relation to sex, in relation to meat, in relation to ritual, all of those things.
I think it's really interesting that, I mean, each time you talked about this, there's one thing that I find quite fascinating, which is the fact that the girl on her first period in seclusion is somehow associated with a game animal.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't have, she bleeds, so does the game animal.
She also is said to hunt. She shoots a zebra, or she shoots.
Well, she doesn't actually do that. It's the men that are out hunting, and she's in seclusion.
Can I try to put this incredibly simply? I mean, Ian has done it, but it's just like we're assuming that the rules governing sex that humans abide by didn't come from top down. It said it didn't come from men, but women needed those rules, and they did it simply by resisting the male gaze and resisting sex. Doing that around dark moon, it's just, if women just need to say no, they can only do it with body language, and that body language has to be pretty damn simple and convincing. And so you just reverse the body language for saying yes to sex. So if you reverse everything, as Ian was saying, it's like you're signaling to the males you don't want to have sex with at dark moon because they're menstruating. You think, all right, we are completely inappropriate as sexual partners. Right, number one, we're not even humans, we're animals. That's wrong creatures. Right, we're not even women, we're males. That's wrong sex. And anyway, we're menstruating. That's wrong time. So wrong sex, wrong species, wrong sex, wrong time. It's just the reverse of what you get among all primates. But when a female wants sex, the male wants to have sex with a female of his own species, and when she's fertile, reverse all those, and you've got everything reversed. And but by reversing your species while you're menstruating, you're becoming. Can you see what's happening? A group of women acting out, being say elans while menstruating. That's identifying their blood with the blood of game animals through ritual. The women don't have to make a big, complicated point about saying our blood is sacred and so is the blood of game animals. Simply by performing that dance, we're doing it in one single step, and thereby rendering the blood of game animals sacred, therefore needing to be respected the same way menstrual blood is respected. Incredibly useful for women, because it means that when men go hunting and the animals bleed, that blood is inedible. That meat is inedible until it's been brought back to camp, and by cooking, which is under women's control, made edible by removing the blood.
But the women's blood actually helps them to hunt, doesn't it? They put it on the arrow tips. Or...
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
men won't be good hunters unless they've got a motive to go hunting. It's not money. There isn't any money. It's not
and both things are happening. So in the Hadza case, women aren't identifying so much with eland, it's more with zebra. And so when you see the line of running women, they see themselves as, you know, even if a zebra stallion has been killed, they keep a sort of the matriarch will fulfill the stallion's role, and they run in a line like that, and like zebra.
So those girls are identifying
the young
as
ones
zebra.
still paint with ash zebra stripes on the legs.
In the on that picture of the mythic, they have zebra cuffs with black and white beads. They deliberately made black and white stockings, so they were also.
I took pictures that the mythic day is like kind of International Women's Day. It's like it's the day of the girls, and the little girls have all got the zebra straps on their legs, and the girls are allowed to fight the boys with sticks, and the boys aren't allowed to take the stick and fight back. The most boys are allowed to. I'm talking about 9-year-old boys or 11-year-old boys. The most they can do is hold the stick to stop.
Well, it said here
that
they would go lean if they harmed one of the mythic. If they touched a mythic, then they become lean. Lean, they'd starve. They'd become.
And that's a bad sign for hunting gathering.
Extremely bad sign.
Fat is
Have we got any more questions on Zoom or in the room, or are we gonna go? Yeah. The question is, do Hadza people normally have sex at night? Yeah.
Often couples will go off
to
like
the bush and
get some honey or go and
in
hunt
couples.
and that soften a euphemism for
Going off for a little honeymoon. But I mean, normally it would be in the heart, at night, as most would be.
Once you're adult, yeah.
Yes, and there used to be this institution of the young girls with the young men, kind of in their own little compartment. You know, a girl would be able to leave her mother's heart and go and stay with the young men, and decide if she wanted to.
Well, no, actually, she would have she would have a hut. And it's a bit like the
with Elena.
With the Elena, yeah, very similar to the Elena. And of course, in
So
the Elena,
she's
you've also got
inviting
the girls
the boys there.
hitting the boys with the sticks.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
very similar.
basically hitting the boys with sticks.
Yeah.
Quite vigorously.
Elena and mythic are extremely
Very
similar.
similar.
Yeah.
Is it in the day or night? That's what the lady wants to know.
I think it's mostly nighttime.
Surely that future part.
One thing for sure is that during an epidemic, I mean, one of the whole points about the epidemic, when all the women are present and the initiated men are present, is you could be pretty sure there's not much hanky-panky going on because all the women are there. So if you want to organise a sex strike,
It's totally segregated.
It's completely gender segregated. It's only initiated men there, not any of the young
So if you
uninitiated
needed
boys.
to organise a sex
And the
strike,
women and
the best-
girls and children.
if you needed to organise a sex strike, the most
Okay, so next week, a complete switch up into questions of evolution, and we're going to be hosting Lucy Cook, who is the author of a brilliant book called Bitch, Revolutionary Guide to Sex, Evolution and the Female Animal. So she's really a zoologist, a broadcaster and journalist, but she's going to be telling us a lot about the scientific patriarchy and its viewpoint on evolution and how they've just left out what females are doing a large part of the time. And of course, females are doing really the most interesting things. So this should be it should be a really great talk. And I hope you'll be joining us again next week on Zoom. Thank you very much to everyone for coming, and to Lawrence, especially the recording and everything. And I'm going to end the Zoom now just to say goodbye to the other guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Great talk. Brilliant. Bye.